Okay, we are recording live.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for stopping by. We have a fantastic guest for you today. Our guest today is a distinguished sociologist whose expertise spans over diverse perspectives, including mindfulness and social well-being. Please welcome Sebastienne Grant. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. We are so excited to have you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no,
Right
we're
on.
really excited. Devin and I have these, long kind of conversations all the time, and I think that, what your topic is something that is really relevant and just kind of
Mhm.
really rings a bell with all of us, and also will do for our audience as well. Um,
Yep.
but first, most of our shows, what we do is we do our two truths and a lie, right, Dev?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna list three things that Sebastian has given me, and we're gonna guess which one is a lie. Right? Okay, here we go.
Stoked.
Number one, I built a tiny house with no prior building experience and lived in it for 4 years.
I love it.
Oh,
I
that's
hope it's true.
good. It's like the tiny house that you guys were just
Yeah.
in Hawaii. Okay, number two. Before becoming a professor, I went to I can't even seminary school
Oh,
and
good.
to become a chaplain. Wow,
What?
yeah.
Mm.
That's interesting too. Number three, I paid my way through college in part by doing experimental drug studies. Oh,
Nice.
okay. Wow. Oh my gosh. So that's the
That's
three.
wild.
We have to guess which one is the lie, right? So two are
Yeah.
two are truths here. What are you thinking?
I think you're a pretty wild person. I think the first one and three are true. I think the
One and
third
three,
one,
the
maybe,
tiny house
maybe
and the
not so
experimental
much.
drug studies. Wow, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with that.
Okay.
What do you think there,
Well,
Nige?
I'm thinking the seminary school to become a chaplain. I
Is it a
mean,
lie?
yeah. I don't know. Maybe could be.
Okay, those are your
Perhaps.
final answers?
Those are our
Locked it
final
in.
answers. Yes.
You're right. You are
Yeah.
right.
I
One
was
and
like,
three were
no.
true, although I identify as kind of an enchanted agnostic, but I also am, part of that spiritual but not religious movement, and I have
Yes,
been
yes.
kind of stalking Harvard's divinity program for a while. They have this really
Ah,
beautiful program where it's drawing a lot of people who, they call it like the movement of the nuns, the None, right?
right.
People
Okay.
um who don't have a particular religious tradition, but really
Mm.
understand the value of religion and kind of the need for some of those things in our society right now. So it's kind of like my backup plan. If I want to get out of academia, it's what I will do.
That's awesome.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. And well, what do you want to
Yeah.
pull some of these other threads here, Devin?
Yeah, what
On
about
number one and three.
I want to hit the last one, but we'll
I knew
just
you
save that
would.
for a second. But what about the tiny house? You built a tiny house and
Hmm.
lived in it for 4 years?
I did, yeah, with my previous partner in Georgia
Uh-huh.
Oh.
before I did my PhD. Um, which also, I just wanted to clarify, technically I'm a psychologist, but it's not
Hmm.
strange at all that you introduced me as a sociologist, because I think I really work at the intersection of
You
those
know
two
what? I
things. And
think I just read that wrong.
it's totally fine
Thank you
because
for
they're
clearing that up.
there a lot of the work that I do is actually more on the sociology side, so they're
Hmm.
kind of similar. But anyway, yeah, so we built a tiny house. I watched a ton of YouTube videos. We didn't know anyone who had built one at that point, and yeah, it was 225 square feet, and we lived in it, my partner and I and our daughter and two dogs.
Oh,
We had five
Whoa.
acres out in Georgia, so it was a beautiful experience. I would
That
do it
is
again.
wild. That is wild.
wow. And didn't you took a break and we're in Hawaii, in the big island of Hawaii, right, Devin? Didn't you have a little tiny
We
something
did.
that you guys rented?
Yeah,
Yeah.
off Hip Camp. Hip Camp's the greatest. We just
Hip.
stayed in a little tiny home. It was fantastic.
It's called
It was
Hip
all we
Camp.
needed, just a little car and a little tiny home. And then we got to just venture. We just like ventured every day.
Oh, that's nice.
But
That's
what the people
nice.
really want to know is, so what about this third one?
Yeah, it's probably not as exciting as it sounds. I
Uh,
think there's probably more exciting ones now, but phase one clinical trials, I
Mm,
did them with friends in college. We would sign up, and I tried to do the ones that weren't too dangerous, I
yeah,
guess, but
fair.
we would stay in this center, which
hmm.
is it's weird. I have these like nostalgic memories for it because it's sort of like a really a little bit of a disturbing summer camp.
Right.
Everybody stays there for the duration of the study, and you stay in bunk rooms, and everybody's got their bunk beds, and you all go to breakfast together and lunch together, and you have
Yeah.
to eat the same things, and
What
you have to
the?
do the same things, and you get to know all of these really amazing people. It's often a lot of like artists, creative people who
Huh.
are just need some extra money,
Right.
and so
Right.
we'd do that, and then would have money to travel in the summers and make it through the year a little bit. And it was, I don't know if I recommend it, but it was a great time for me.
It takes a certain type of person to be able to like be in that environment and handle something like that. That does sound pretty intense.
Yeah, it was oddly fun, but I didn't have any bad experiences, so
Cool. Well,
it's
that's
okay.
good. Just
Oh,
as soon
that's
as I heard that, I thought of that show Manic. Have you ever seen that with like Jonah Hill
No,
and
no.
Emma Stone? Anyways, it's wild,
I'm gonna write it down.
but it's like about that. So
Nice. I'll check it
cool,
out.
Oh,
cool,
huh.
cool.
That's interesting because I know that well, quite a few years back in 2010. I don't know how old you were, Deb. You're probably 16, I guess. We were
I'm
invited
not good at math.
yeah, we were invited to go deep into the Amazon rainforest with a group called the Pachamama Alliance out of San
Mm,
Francisco, led by an
Um,
incredible woman, Lynn Twist, and we were able to spend a week or so with the Ashwar tribe, and we did ceremony, and I had no idea what ceremony was at the time,
mm,
and we were there, and we did ceremony. We had some ayahuasca. Well, we had some shamans working with us the whole night, and I got it. That experience there completely changed my life. I got to admit, and our whole family. I mean, Kina didn't partake, but you did, right, Devin?
mm,
And your older brother did, and Reiko did too. And I mean, it wasn't a an experiment, but it was definitely something that we'd never, I mean, played around a little bit when I was younger with other stuff, but this was
mm,
really very deep and into my, it got really into my psyche. And I was going through a whole thing where I was going to sell my business at the time to a company in London. And I didn't know if I felt quite right about it, but it got so deep into my conscious or my soul. And basically what happened was I said no, and I pulled it off the table and just kind of continued with life. But that experience there changed everything, and it was, and I know they're doing a lot of work with those type of with ayahuasca and wachuma and all these different MDMA's and things like that too healing for healing processes, right?
mm.
So I don't know where this was leading, but I'm just sharing that um, with you guys that
Yeah.
definitely was a life changing thing for us, and I think you too. Hey, Deb, I don't know what I mean. You were a lot younger then, but yeah.
Yeah, it definitely was an intense experience. I've definitely had some LSD journeys that have been really intense after that, but it definitely
Mm,
profoundly changed your life. I saw that like from day one. You definitely changed your like life's goal.
yeah.
We probably wouldn't be doing this if that didn't happen.
No. I agree. I agree. I wouldn't be doing
No.
this unless we went down kind of that the journey of the rabbit hole with
Yeah, it
that.
went from
Yeah.
like business and build my empire to like, oh my God, we need to save the planet, guys, or you guys are fucked.
Right. Well, yeah, it
Just
did go. It went from that. It went from take the business off the table and use the business and leverage the business to do good in the world, whatever good was at that time.
yeah.
But you did say something interesting there just a second ago. It's the freak out. So I just have to read something here. Um, and it just popped off. And so on the weekend, I was doing a little bit of research, and I read something from John Hopkins Center for
Mm,
Health and Security last week, right? And talking about our climate and climate change, and just like what you were saying, go off and save the world. What is that? Um, so, so from John Hopkins, climate change is increasing the risk of infectious diseases, including fungal infections and extreme warm because of the warming planet. And there's all these studies, ABC News, the growing threat of fungal infections and fungi that infect the lungs can take weeks to diagnose, and it's all these things that are happening. And then in the Health Policy Watch, record heat, sea levels, and melting global ice and global warming reports. All this is going on here. So when we see this all the time, we're being bombarded by this all the time. And how do we feel? Like, how do you guys feel? Like when I read this type of stuff, it just makes me feel, oh my gosh, I get this anxiety level goes through the roof. And I'm feeling that most of the people on the planet that are aware are starting to feel this way. So us as humans, we're this anxiety level over this. I think it's really starting to affect our human race. So Sebastian, like, what do you think about this? What's going on now, and how us humans are reacting, and what's actually in this time of our evolution. What we're all going through here. I don't know if you want to comment on some of that. Sorry, I was rambling on a bit again.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I'm already kind of making all these connections too between like, climate anxiety and life-changing psychedelic kind of experiences. And,
Right.
all of this stuff is actually
Ah,
related to kind of where I'm hanging out right now in the work that I'm
okay.
doing.
Interesting.
Um, I think you're absolutely right. I think that climate anxiety is increasing, becoming an acknowledged factor in the
Mm.
human experience. The APA, the American Psychological Association, a few years ago kind of had this like big task force to look at climate anxiety, and they called for more research and awareness around the effects that climate anxiety was having, that climate change was having on mental health, including anxiety and depression and the sorts of things, and really calling for therapists to become more aware
Mm.
when they see clients. Kind of the previous attitudes in the psych world were kind of, drawing back on like old school psychoanalytic things like, oh, but what does this represent for you? Like, what does climate anxiety represent for you?
Mm.
With something that happened in your childhood or something, really dismissing that is what people were actually anxious about. And I think that could come from some resistance on the part of the therapist too, because we don't want to admit or talk about this stuff. We kind of want to brush it under the rug because
Mm-hmm.
when we look at it, it is so massive and huge, and we don't know what to do about it. Um, and I'm really interested in the work that I do is more, it's really at the intersection between societal well-being, individual well-being, societal structures, and things like this. So there are people definitely on the side of it who are looking at how this is impacting individual well-being and experience. And I think it's essential that we look at that because our societies are made of people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I'm also interested in how our individual reactions um, interact with our behaviors or impact our behaviors. And so, what the research is showing is that denial and despair are very closely related. Denial is probably a
Ah,
defensive reaction in many cases,
right.
to the existential dread, to the despair, to the ontological shock that would come from accepting what it would mean that the way that we're doing things, that capitalism, neoliberalism, materialism, all of these things that humans have invested in for so long are actually now leading us toward you know toward a bad path. Maybe they've
Right.
kind of peaked out at what they can offer us, and now so it's not just believing this one thing, it's like
Mm-hmm.
having to believe all of these things, but that both of those, denial and despair, both seem equally um detrimental to action.
Sure. Yeah.
So on the climate change advocate side, people talk so much about the deniers, but when we collapse into despair, we're just as ineffective. We don't
Right.
help anybody. And
Right,
so I'm
right.
really interested in, how we can deal with denial and despair, not only for our own well-being, but also so that we can be better actors and change makers.
Mm.
Right, right. Wow. Yeah, it just seems that every time I hate turning on the TV, but every time we turn on the TV, it's we're just getting bombarded with the negative side of things. We never have the
Right.
positive side. It's always the negative, 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 and it's just beating us down as a species, as the people on the planet here. Like it seems to be just the negative side of it, and it's just not good for anybody. And I think that you said something that in order to change, we need to change ourselves in order to change the whole picture. But we need to be conscious of it, right? We need to be conscious of what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's rising awareness that the tactics that we've been using aren't
Yeah.
working. And
Yeah.
and what we tend to go to in our society for everything, like if we want to change other people's behavior or our own behavior,
Mm-hmm.
we tend to go first toward shame, blame, guilt, punishment, fear,
Mm-hmm.
um, because we believe that those are the most motivating emotions. And what the research is showing is that they are very motivating short term. So
Mm-hmm.
if you tell people the world is on fire and you have to do these things to change it,
Mm.
they'll take it very seriously, they'll freak out, and they'll do those things for a few weeks or a month maybe, and then it's just too scary and overwhelming. And people feel hopeless too, right? It's such a
Sure.
huge
Yeah.
problem. What can
Yeah.
I do? They fall into despair. And so that those change behaviors uh, decline. And, you
Right.
kind of go back to baseline. Um, and what I'm interested in is how we can have more sustainable behavioral changes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's a lot, we can get into all of this. There's a lot of different things that we can do that I think increase our chances of sustainable change. But one
Mm-hmm.
of the things that I'm really interested in is the our relationship with saving the world and with being able
Uh-huh.
to fix things is really a
Right.
control-based project.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's also a doomed project, and it always would be no matter what we did, because the sun has a finite amount of energy, because
Yeah.
everything is impermanent, because everything is in flux.
Everything's in
And
change. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and so when we approach our work as if, well, and this is much bigger than climate change. This is sort of a Western American attitude in general. I'm only going to participate if I could possibly win.
Mm.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And so if we don't see how we personally or as a, society or as a species could win, then we
Mm-hmm.
don't understand why we should participate.
Right. Right.
Um, and so I've really been thinking about, what else can motivate us? Okay, try not to use shame, blame, fear, guilt. Try not to use we have to save the world.
Right.
What's left.
Right.
And for me, that's care and love, and these feelings that are more nurturing. Like we act in a loving way because it feels good to love,
Mm-hmm.
because it feels good to nurture. And you don't do it because you're attached to the outcome. You do it because in that moment it
Mm-hmm.
feels like the good and the right thing to do. And I make this comparison. I talk about, how we are in relation to our pets. We adopt a pet.
Yeah.
We know that their lifespans are likely going to be shorter than ours.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't say, well, you're going to die anyway, so I'm not going to take care of you. Like, I can't win. Why would I feed you?
Yeah.
Why would I take you to the vet? You're just going to die.
Yeah.
We nurture and invest, and we care and we love, and we have that connection and that relationship because it nourishes us, because it feels good. Love and connection feels good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, And so what if we do that? What if we have that orientation toward the environment and toward one another, of just coming from a place of like, what is the most caring, respectful, responsible, but just loving thing to do? And far could we get with that? And it also shifts it from being sort of self-centered motivation. This shame, blame, guilt, and fear are all about my feelings. Like, I'm feeling uncomfortable and I want to feel better. And what that means is that we are short-term motivated to fix the disaster.
Right.
But once the disaster's gone and we're not feeling uncomfortable anymore, then there's no incentive to continue.
Right.
We just go back to
Putting
our old
energy.
ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas if you're motivated from love and care, there's no end to that. Like you just continue to do it. If the being that you love is flourishing, then you feel so good and you continue to pour, love and care into them and see them flourish more, because that brings you joy. So I think it's more sustainable on that end also.
Interesting. And you said something yesterday on one of the podcasts I was listening to about the 3 Buddhist poisons, which I thought was interesting because my wife's Buddhist, and we spent a little bit of time in Japan and whatnot. And I thought that was interesting because the one was greed. So greed was like, there's never enough, so I need to hoard as much as I can. This is in our Western, I think in our Western world, or maybe this is just general humans. And then ignorance, seeing ourselves as separate. So loneliness, you get the loneliness and emptiness because you're separate from everybody and everything isn't connected. It's just me. And then aggression, things that scare me, there's things that scare us and create tension, and we don't fully understand. It's just this, we just feel, it's just this, those are the 3 types of poisons. And I can completely see this, just growing and grow in, I don't know about in the rest of the world, but definitely in the West here where we are, just this isolation and this segregation, and then this polarization between us and them, whoever them are. It's just happening more and more and more. And yeah, like what you're saying, love, it's like John Lennon said his love, it's all, everything is about love, right? Love and compassion. And but I know that we seek love and compassion, and we seek things by meditation. Meditations is great, but there's something else that you mentioned that it's full. It's great, that we come out of our world of go 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 and all this stuff, and then we meditate to try and fix things, right? Where that's not really the answer. It's like, and then you're going back to your go 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 go, but that, I meditate so everything's cool, or I do yoga and meditate, everything's cool. I'm fine. That's actually not necessarily good for us, right? We need to change the root of everything in order to to change ourselves. I think that's what
Yeah.
you're saying. Yeah. Correct me if I'm
Well,
completely wrong.
I think we need radical transformation, and I think that
Yeah.
can happen at the individual level and at the societal level, and that they're completely interconnected, right? So you can start
Mm.
in either place, and some people are more drawn to action at the macro level, at the societal level, and some people are more drawn to change at the individual level, and often those are put as being intention. It's like, oh, you're just kind of being you're
Mm.
only concerned with your own well-being, and you're just trying to make yourself feel better, or you're trying to make the system great but losing sight of the individuals who are part of it. And when we do that, sometimes we create systems that seem to be functioning really well, but the individuals are actually not thriving within them. So I
Right.
think you need to do both of those together. But yeah, so that the 3 poisons, of course, is talked about in many places, but I think what I was probably referring to in that former podcast was David Loy, in his book The New Buddhist Path, talks about how these are and these are talked about in different ways. Ignorance, desire, and aversion is one way. Greed would be desire, and violence is aggression is aversion. That these are consequences of becoming a conceptualized, languaged, ego-based being. They are just things that humans are going to have to deal with. But we can have different personal practices and cultural practices and societal structures that can help ease those. And the primary one is ignorance, that fundamental misunderstanding of our separateness from nature, or I guess misunderstanding of our connection with everything that leads to the other 2. And so one of the challenges for us in Western societies and unfortunately increasingly globalized
Yeah,
spaces
yeah.
is that capitalism has really um, uh, kind of enhanced, I think, these challenges. It's enhanced our disconnection, our understanding of ourselves as separate from others and from nature. It really plays on our desire, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and also our aversion, and kind of gives us this, like, you can have a life that where you don't have to experience anything you don't want to, where you can have everything that you want, and really fuels that. And so one of the things that David Loy says is that it doesn't matter, we can envision all of these beautiful ways of utopian societies, beautiful ways of organizing
Right.
ourselves at the social level, government, economic structures, and stuff like that. But unless we actually do the transformative work, and this is what happens at the individual level, we
Mm.
will continue to reproduce the same problems in our new systems. And we've seen that with different, there are revolutions and new governments take place, and we see sort of the same patterns of dysfunction and harm
Mm-hmm.
playing out again. And that's because we haven't done this individual work. Now, it's harder to do that when, as you said, you go meditate and then you go back out into the world, and you're in this world that doesn't at all support
Right.
that kind of transformation. But it makes it all the more essential that we do that work too. And so I think we have to do it at the individual level.
Mm-hmm.
What you're saying about meditation and mindfulness, especially as
Mm-hmm.
people practice it in the West, is often not transformative. And I think that's in part because it has met with capitalist and neoliberal culture,
Mm.
and then it's put in service of that. And so what ends up happening is that
Okay. Mm.
we meditate and practice mindfulness.
Yeah.
They have like corporate mindfulness coaches who will
Sure.
come in
Oh yeah.
and essentially help you learn how to dissociate more from your physical body and your emotions, so that you can cope better with really unhealthy work conditions and societal conditions. And it's supporting those larger unhealthy systems by just helping us stay afloat. And that's been from the critical psych field. That's been there's been a similar criticism of mainstream psychology, that what it's been doing is enabling unhealthy systems to continue by kind of duct taping people back together,
Right.
keeping them floating just well enough. And it keeps us from really identifying the source of our struggles as being, external to us. But which is one of the reasons I favor compassion practices over mindfulness practices, because they always have that element of interconnectivity and attention to the other, and to the connection between our suffering and our well-being and that of the others. And it's a little bit harder to co-opt. But there are ways to do these practices where you're not using them in service of that. But as I warned you, I will get a bit tangential, but
No, no, this is fascinating. I love it. Love it. Wow.
but I'm going to actually bring this back to your talk about the life-changing experience you had with ayahuasca and psychedelics. And
Mm.
I want to maybe premise this by saying that psychedelics are certainly not for everyone. I don't recommend that everyone go and take
definitely.
them. They're not safe for everyone. And the experience without any kind of practice or framing or development toward being able to have that experience and integrate it as you would if you were part of a culture who had, shamans or healers that would
Mm-hmm.
help you through these practices, help you come back and integrate. It can be really destabilizing.
Sure.
That said, there's some really interesting research about people who have psychedelic experiences in research and non-research settings,
Mm-hmm.
and the impact that has on their pro-social and pro-environmental behaviors.
Oh,
And that
interesting.
really seems to be the mechanism of impact, really
Mm-hmm.
seems to be that opening to our connection, to our deep interconnectivity and connection with all that is beyond us. So that gets at the root of the ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
and can then address the, desire and aversion aspects. And so there's some really amazing research being done with that. And, so that's one of the tools in our toolboxes, maybe there, and mindfulness and compassion is another tool in our toolbox. And I think we have a lot of them. I don't think there's one thing that everybody should do that's going to be the answer to everything.
No.
But when we look at all these practices that seem to help, they do all seem, I believe, to fundamentally get down to breaking that division between the self and other in some way.
Mm-hmm. You talk about the compassion. I'm just gonna talk, I guess, from a little bit of self experience where yeah, I mean, I was stuck in the corporate world for years and years and years, having my own business, and it was like we're in survival mode, and you get up, you're in the shower every morning, and you're thinking, okay, can I hire people? How many people do I have to lay off? Can I make payroll? Year after 20 years goes by, and you're stuck on that wheel, just going round and round and round and round, and you're in survival mode. And then all of a sudden, for me, I was able to kind of put one toe outside of that, and that was giving back, and then, I mean, Devin's been many times. A friend of mine, looked at me, kind of shook me, and said, "Hey, Nigel, why don't you come and do some of this volunteer work?" And so I went with our family. We went down to Mexico. We were building houses for the homeless, and after that, we went many, many times, and we led groups and all this. But I found for myself just that little bit of giving of yourself and feeling compassion for other beings and other people and hearing their life story. Um, it just, I don't know. It just gave me so much like feeling of why I'm here, and it's not all about this, the wheel going around. It's like it's compassion to other humans. It's helping, and it really started to slowly change. I mean, it didn't change overnight, but it just a little bit here, a little bit here, and now we're 20 years later. It's made such a huge impact in my life and our family life, and we've done a lot as giving as family, like going and actually participating as families, and I just found that super super powerful, and it really changed everything. Everything, just doing something like that. um yeah. So
Yeah, I kind of think compassion is like the most underrated powerful tool that we have.
right,
It's like
right.
it can change it's so incredibly powerful. And there's a lot of research. Matthew Ricard wrote a book called Altruism, and it's
Mm,
a great kind of collection of a lot of the research on what happens when we serve others and are other oriented.
mm.
Um, but there's some really interesting stuff. If people think about compassion, the word compassion, right, to suffer with,
Right,
people
right,
think like, oh, that's not fun. I don't want to do
right.
that. Like, I don't
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
suffer. I don't want to
sure.
be attuned to the suffering of others.
Mm,
Um, but the research shows that it tends to bring us joy. And there are some interesting differences between empathy and compassion that seem to be a really kind of key to this. But compassion, it seems to fill us with joy, with courage.
mm,
It makes us take inventory of what we have to offer. So it makes us feel more rich with personal resources, financial resources, whatever it is, rather than being in a scarcity mindset, which is really
yeah,
a kind of
yeah.
a chronic mindset for our society. What do I lack? What do I lack? What do I need? What can I get? Rather than what do I have to offer?
Yeah,
And then we're
living
like,
in
oh my gosh,
abundance.
actually,
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
I have so much. But also the research shows really interesting things in the brain. People have been doing compassion practices, meditations for years, seem to have increased not only activity, but capacity in parts of their brain related to joy, happiness, and approach motivations, like going towards things.
Hmm.
And, versus people who haven't had these tend to have more activity in uh, people who have done these practices have also decreased activity in depression and anxiety centers,
Mm-hmm.
um, and like less avoidance motivation, so less of the pulling away from things.
Right.
Um, and you can see that, in
Oh
the
yeah,
brain, but
yeah,
but
yeah.
But you can also experience it. Like you said, you don't have to rely on the neuroscientists for this stuff. You can
Right.
try it out
Well, I know. I
for
mean, I
yourself.
know every time we do anything like that, I think there's a whole bunch of little prongs here. I mean, it's a sense of community because you're usually doing it with other people. They're either volunteering or helping or whatever. So there's that, and you have a bond with these other people, and then you have a bond with the people that you're serving, and I I come away and I'm bouncing off the roof for like 2, 3 weeks afterwards. I just feel great and good in this sense of community. And it's just one of the most incredible, powerful things that I've ever personally done. And it's just, and it's, I don't know, Dev. I mean, Dev, you've done quite a bit. How's it affected? Have you felt about that?
But yeah, definitely going down there as at like a young age for like a long time changed everything. Maybe as an older person too, it would have done stuff to me now. I mean, older person, not 27. So, but we went down there when I was like, I don't know, what, 8,
Probably. Yeah,
something like
I
that.
would think so. Yeah.
And it just made that the normal perspective. And I think just life is all about just
Mm,
different perspectives, right? And just like you see, on TV, um, or like people suffering or this and that. But it's like hard to just like put yourself in those shoes because you're like, oh, well, I saw that for a second, but I'm going to go live my day-to-day normal life.
right.
Everything is just going to go on like it always has.
Mm,
But then going down there, it was just like a very intense experience because you're like meeting this family that you're building a house for, and they haven't had a house for like, 10 generations or something. They've been
right.
living in like the dirt. And then I don't speak Spanish, but I can converse with this kid just like who's my same age with like sign language and just like a smile and like a laugh and like a handshake and like playing a game. And I remember sitting there and having this just like super profound experience at like 9 or something. Like, oh my goodness, like this is like Jason, my best friend back home. Like this is I
Mm,
could if I was just geographically, if I was born here, this is me.
hmm
Huh.
hmm
Yeah.
And then that whole thing with the yeah, compassion. I'm I'm putting myself in this person's shoes because it's so here right now in front of me, so live, so such a visceral feeling of just no one chooses where they're born, and based on where you're born, sometimes major outcomes in different ways of life just hit you, and to come home and then be like, I will remember that forever, and I will, yeah, because we just like I think you said before, like disassociate with like our feelings or like what it's like an easy like getaway. I just don't want to think about it, so I'm not going to, and it's not here affecting me, so I'm just not gonna go down that path.
hmm
But it definitely changed my life. Yeah. And
hmm
everybody who
Yeah.
came down with us is definitely,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think our society does a lot to keep us disconnected from
Mm,
what's going on, in the
Mm,
outside world and hmm, from the costs of the way that we live also, right?
right.
And I think you're right, that direct experience sitting across from someone, allowing that element of empathy to come up, but then, framing. So one of the differences with compassion than empathy is you have a little bit of a gap. You realize that this
hmm
person is having an experience that touches you, but that it's not the same experience that you're having.
mm,
And then there's that desire to help. Um, but it starts with that seeing. You
mm,
Right.
have to be aware. You have to know what's going on. How do we have these experiences? I think, as much as I struggle with technology, with this sort of thing, um, I also think there are a lot of opportunities for us to connect, to see what's going on for other people, to have the veil kind of removed,
hmm
um, and to share stories. And humans are also really attuned to stories,
Sure.
that we hear the stories of other people's lives, whether those are um, dramatized, fictionalized, or, just kind of people sharing their own experiences. I think there's
hmm
power there, but what you're both saying is just supports all of the research, which is that, we know that that greater wealth does not exponentially increase happiness. We know
Right.
this.
Right.
There's a ton of it even seems like there's a bell curve in many cases once you get kind of your basic needs met, and you can do some maybe some traveling, some things that you want to do. Wealth beyond that, we often see a decrease in well-being and
Right. Right.
increases in mental health stuff. Um,
Mhm.
and this is what, you know, we're told from the time we're born here. The path to happiness is more material stuff,
Yeah.
more freedom to do
Mm,
whatever you want,
mm,
Mm.
you know,
mhm.
and like and avoidance of suffering.
Right.
Don't suffer. And that
Right.
psychology has played a huge role in that, especially sort of, you know, positive psychology. It's almost become like pathologically, we have like a pathological relationship with happiness, where if we suffer at all, we see it as like a personal failure and we're like embarrassed by it. And, you know, so
Okay.
again, we dissociate, like cut off our feelings to our bodies, cut off our feeling or our emotions. Um, but we also have research that shows that there are some things that actually do seem to be to have a meaningful impact, a significant impact on our happiness. And
Mhm.
these are things like service to others, compassion, gratitude, and
Mm,
being in service to others often also inspires gratitude, connection, meaning, feeling like
mhm.
our actions, our being has meaning. Another thing that compassion and service do,
Mhm.
belonging, you know, all of these things. And I feel like we are kind of ripe for a revolution where we wake up
Yes.
to
Yes.
the
Yes.
real to the real factors of well-being and happiness, and realize that we've been you know, I don't know that we've been duped. I think that the people who've told us this believed it, and I think that at some point capitalism and materialism and, you know,
Sure.
technology did improve people's quality of life, at least some people's quality of life.
Right.
um and, you know, and so people had a reason to believe that, and then we over focused and sort of lost sight of all of this stuff that actually seems to be really the most beneficial. But what's amazing is the
Mm.
stuff that is the most beneficial for our individual well-being is
Yes.
also the very stuff that's the most beneficial for others, for societal and environmental well-being. So, you know, we often see these intention. We're told we're all individual units out for ourselves, what we want, you know, we have to get what we want, and who cares about the other? Or
Mm.
maybe you care about them, but that's just how it is.
Mhm.
um and I think that is just, it's a huge tragic misunderstanding, very dangerous misunderstanding.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that you know the serving is one, but community. I think just community. We've kind of lost
Yeah.
Mm.
our sense of community in the West here. I just, you know, you go to Europe and you see like the Italians and the Spanish and the little piazzas. And then in the evening at 6 o'clock, you know, everybody comes down and it's the grandparents with the grandkids and the extended families. And they're all hanging out
Yeah.
together and it's this community. And it's almost, and it's something that we've kind of, no, I'm going to stay in my own little cubicle here and I'm not going to
Yeah.
associate with it. And then when you get, you know, people kind of the affluent, you get more so affluent, they call it success, but then you become more isolated because now I'm going to go to the exclusive resort of the exclusive thing, exclusive. I'm not going to associate with the rest of humanity.
Mm.
I'm going to stay in my own little world where you know everybody's, but they're not. That's not reality. You're not living in reality, right?
Yeah.
That's why I just think it's beautiful when you see that, like you see those countries, you go South America, a lot parts of the world, we have the extended families and community. I mean, we do this little thing on Sunday mornings now. My wife and I, we've been invited. We go and we do these cold plunges in the ocean and wherever we do it on our own because Devin got I was doing having some anxiety issues, so Devin got me into Wim Hof breathing and then cold plunging and all this, and I've it's really helped me. But now there's a community of us where we go down to Deep Cove here on Sunday mornings, and there's like 10 or 12 of us. So we went yesterday morning and we all went down there, and then we're all in this thing together. And it's like we're gonna
Yeah.
go in. So we're 6 minutes in this water. The water's like 5 degrees centigrade. It's cold and we're in there, but we're in this together. It's a togetherness thing, and it's only 6 minutes, and then we all go for coffee. Well, what happens when we're at coffee? We're all 1,000 miles an hour because we've
Yeah.
all almost like we've gone to battle together in this funny little way, but we form this sense of community, and we go there and we come home from these like the Sunday, and we're just Reiko and I, we're over the moon. We're bouncing off the walls for like 3, 4 hours because we had this connection with people, kind of in this funny, deep little way. Because we all survived this cold water. It's freezing, and then we come out. We're all there trying to get our coffee. We're shaking. We can't even carry it to the table because it's spilling everywhere because we're shaking. But it's this thing that it's just, and I think I don't know, we're kind of lacking this now, and I just really enjoy really connecting with this community. It means a lot. It means a lot to me and to Reiko and to yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. I think we do have a lack of community, and it's not just on that big level of like going to the resort. There's
Yeah.
sort of as you said, kind of a correlation between affluence and isolation, and part of
Sure.
that's because we don't need each other. If my car breaks down, I can just, get an Uber to take me to the
Right.
rental car place, and I can rent a car and I can have my car towed. Whereas if you have less resources, you have to call your neighbor or a family member. And so it's like over and
Mm,
over again, that need reinforces
Hmm.
um, the collective strength of the community. But what happens in the absence of that, it's not just that we are missing community and connection. We also feel more vulnerable, and like we
Hmm.
have to be able to deal with every challenge alone because we don't have those networks of support. And that even more makes us want to resource hoard and, have,
Uh-huh.
I need everything in my garage that I can,
Right.
for my own well. And of course we don't, because we lose the connections. And I just read this really beautiful book by, I think it was Frank Gruber McAllister on suffering,
Mm-hmm.
but oh, what was I just gonna say? I totally lost my train. Oh, yeah. Um, that one of the things he says is that we need community. We know that we need community, and not just community, but collaboration. Like we need to be able
Hmm.
to work collaboratively,
Right.
but we don't know how because we haven't grown up in communities, so we don't have them. We don't know how to create them. And then when we
Mm-hmm.
get them, we don't actually know how to function together in that way. And so often people crave that, they come together, they create these networks, and then when it gets hard, like when there are different opinions or desires, or you don't know how to work together, rather than being able to move through that, people just pull away and go back to
Right.
what feels comfortable, even though they're lonely and not thriving as they could be. So part of what we have to do is relearn how to be with each other and how to work with each other and live with each other.
Yeah, and it's and we're moving so fast into isolation with our phones and everything because I mean, I can't believe like over the period of 10 years since this phone thing has become crazy is that you go to a restaurant, there's two people there and they're both on their phones, they're not talking to each other. Like just stuff like
Yeah.
that's like a tiny thing, but it's expanding, exponentially. Everywhere you go, people are walking down the street, going across a crosswalk on their phone. They're not looking at the outside world. And then we had a visitor come. He visited us last week from Denmark, and he's here at a conference in Vancouver. And there are people from all over the U.S., mostly U.S., came in. And I said, "Where'd you go?" He said, "Oh, we went out across the suspension bridge in nature. It was just beautiful, whatever." And I said, "Oh, how did that go with your team building?" He goes, "Yeah, some of them weren't into it." And I'm like, "Oh, they weren't into it." He goes, "Yeah, no, they're just not into nature." And I looked at him like, What is that? Like, what do you mean that? Like, that doesn't register at me at all, zero." Um, it's like, what do you mean they're not into nature? No, they're just not into it. They're from a city. They just whatever. They don't care about nature at all. I'm like, I've never heard that before. That's really
mm,
interesting. And is that the way our society is going? Like, it's this isolation, and but it's a little bit scary. Yeah, very scary. Yeah, yeah,
Well, yeah, I mean, that it's related that people don't learn how to connect. They don't learn how to relate to
yeah,
nature. And that's something, I
yeah.
mean,
Which
you stick
is
a kid in nature and we
oh
have
yeah,
kind of a natural
exactly.
instinctual desire to connect. I
Yeah,
always
they're
say this, like, even if
looking
you're
in
in
the
a city,
dirt and they're yeah,
yeah, a kid will be like following an ant around,
for
on
sure.
the sidewalk and stuff, but we lose that, and we're also told that nature is the enemy and it's scary and it's trying
Uh,
to kill us, and that we have to have this separation and dominant relationship with it. And I think everything is like it's always snowballing. The more we're told that, the more we don't connect and relate to nature, don't have those nourishing relationships, and only do experience it as a threat because we don't know anything about it also. So then we end up in nature and we're just like, oh, I'm getting mosquito bites
Right,
and I'm
right.
wet because I don't have a raincoat because I didn't think about rain, whatever it is. um so it reinforces that. And yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
another thing, is like we have to learn how to be in community with each other, and we also have to learn how to
right.
reconnect with our natural surroundings if we're going to care about them, and then be motivated from that place of love, right? And not only the place of fear for our own um, ability to continue to live on this planet.
Right.
Mm.
Talk about nature. I'm just going to sneak away for a nature break for a
Yeah.
second, and I'll let you and Devin chat for 2 seconds. I'll
Sure.
be right back. Sorry about that.
It
Yeah, no worries.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely wild. Like I find, well, like what Nigel's saying, like people saying they're not into nature. Like one of my friends not too long ago was like, I just don't like. I like being in my little box in the city and then going out and going to work and has no time to like tree bathe and stuff. I feel like it's just so important to know like where we came from. Like, that's where we came from. How can we be
Yeah.
so disconnected from this place that is the essentially I mean, no, it is. It's the reason why we're all here, right?
Yeah, still, right? It's not just where we came from, but our current lives are also dependent on it.
Right.
Still.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
then of course the phone thing and the social media thing and it just throws all these distractions in our way. Especially the phone thing. It's like we just have all this like information, so much information at our fingertips, but and there's good parts of it, of course. Like there, of course, it helps us in our day to day, but it also like the bad parts, like because like there's Instagram and TikTok, which can be good, which can be like educational, which can you can learn
Hmm.
a lot of things from, you can connect, you can follow art, but you can also just go down mindless rabbit holes for hours and basically
And
nothing.
I do both of those.
Yeah, I know, and me too.
Yeah.
Like I'm a
Yeah.
absolute like no shame in it. I'm like a slave to it as well. I think we
Yeah.
all are at some
Yeah.
degree. Um, but it's just interesting to think however long ago, like not that long ago, that these things didn't exist.
Yeah.
Or like when I was a baby, there was no like internet, and my parents were going to the library and stuff. It just like seems like so
Yeah.
quick. And where's it gonna go? Well, how quickly is this gonna just take off in the next even 10 years? Like that's kind of
Well, I mean, I'm hoping that I see already, I work with young people, I work with
Mhm.
undergrad students. I'm
mm,
seeing already growing awareness of the problem,
right.
with our over engagement with technology in ways
Mm,
that don't necessarily serve us.
right.
Hmm.
I think it's legitimately addictive, and there's research to
Sure.
support this too. We get huge um, surges of dopamine from acquiring new information,
Right.
and
Mhm.
that's that's my biggest addiction with the phone, is just like, it's like, hit me with the knowledge dopamine. I need the rush. I would need to learn about the life cycle of carpenter ants right now.
Right.
um
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
I don't know if y'all have heard about these like stimulation cleanses, dopamine cleanses that people are doing. There's kind of a growing
No,
movement
yeah.
for, yeah, like spending a weekend where you try not to do any. People take it to different levels. Some people do like no talking, no reading, nothing that would kind of stimulate the mind. And this is similar to
Oh,
going on like a silent retreat, like a Buddhist
sure,
retreat or
Mhm.
something. But
sure.
people are doing it because there's this understanding that now we are so kind of dependent on this high level of stimulation all the time, that
Mm.
things like going for a walk in nature, we can't connect because there's not enough stimulation in our brains that just kind of like, oh, it's boring, and so we're not able to be present and actually see what is. And so we have to be able to slow down our brain to be able to be present to each other,
Mhm.
present to nature. Um, yeah, but it's
Mhm.
a challenge for me for sure. My
Mm.
relationship with my phone is
Yeah,
a hard
it's
one.
so
Yeah.
it's interesting that I remember, okay, this is before COVID and everything, and the business stuff. I'd be like, okay, I've got an hour and a half break or whatever it is. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna ride my bike. I'm a biker, a mountain biker, so I'll go ride my bike as hard as I can to get the best workout in that small period of time because that's the break that I've got. Okay, so
Mhm.
that's what my life was like for many years. for 25 years but then when COVID hit, Reiko and I were living at Whistler for the year, and there was no people because of the borders were shut. It was us and bears. We saw more bears than humans, and we go hiking for probably 3 hours every day in the woods in the forest, and I'd see those people that would come and they'd go jogging by me as fast as they could, and then they would disappear, right? And I go, okay, this is interesting.
Hmm.
We're now walking in nature. We're walking in nature. We actually then we started touching the trees, and then we started observing. There's mushrooms everywhere. So many mushrooms. And we started looking at mushrooms and taking photographs of mushrooms and entering photograph contests for mushrooms and all this stuff. And then, but we really like we were walking and we were in nature as
Hmm.
opposed to running through it. And I know COVID was a really, really hard time, but that really was a big reset for us. It just completely reset everything. As I was like, hang on a second here. And now it's like, I just continue this type of thing every day. Every morning, I do my morning routine, and Reiko does her morning routine, and a little bit of breath work and yoga and whatever. And you can do 20 minutes, you can do 2 hours, whatever it is, but it completely sets you up for an amazing day as opposed to that looking at your phone as soon as you wake up and then you're in go mode and just that's little bit of time to yourself and it's just been incredible. And I think that was a big reset. That whole COVID thing was a big reset, I think, for our human race to kind of look inside a lot more. I'm not sure if it worked, but it sure had some kind of an effect.
I'm so curious to know what the long-term impacts of COVID
Yeah.
are going to be, the shutdown, because I think that
Mm,
we did see some really big changes
mm,
and rediscovery of kind of
yeah.
simple joys, and also our longing for connection and being able to drop in a little bit, because of maybe the reduced pace and stimulation. And then
Mm,
I think we saw kind of a very quick rebound to the way that things used to be for a lot of people. But, I think that makes sense because we didn't choose it. It was forced on us. And
mm-hmm,
there's such a relief, also just with the anxiety of having this pandemic and not knowing the toll that that's going to take on human life. And so there's just kind of this reclaiming of the life that we had.
mm-hmm,
But we still have those experiential memories, right? And so I
mm-hmm,
wonder if those will continue to resurface,
mm-hmm.
and remind us of these other things that we need and are nourished by, and whether we'll see more impacts like later on. I hope
Yeah.
so. I don't know.
I hope so too. I mean, I know Dev, you guys got heavily into the swimming, the cold water swimming off the beach, and when you have
Yeah.
your community, right, and all these things that you guys were doing together, and hanging out in nature, and
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Cold plunges for sure. I don't know. My buddy just told me about him. He's like, get in there. It's just like could overly active brain, definitely pretty ADD, can never really focus too much
Hmm.
on one thing for too long. 50 minutes, and then I'm pretty much onto something new, or like really get into some like the circus, thing that we did. It just like went so hard into that for so long, and now I'm getting to this part where I'm like pulling back a little bit, and I like
Hmm.
will only do circus arts when we're performing in a show instead of like practicing in my spare time because I'm on to like DJing and music now. And before that, I was on to like martial arts, and before that, I was on to painting, and it's just it's just a never ending. But it's good. But it's like I'm just like mediocre at everything. I'm not great at like one thing
Ah, you're
necessarily.
pretty good. You're pretty
Renaissance
good at a lot of
person.
things.
I totally identify, and I have learned
Yeah.
to view it as a valid and valuable way of being in the world.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, I get to
That's
experience like
awesome.
everything rather than being like, I am the greatest hockey player alive, but I know nothing about music or art and this and that. And so do get to experience a lot of things, but the cold water
Mm.
definitely was the one place I can calm. And while I'm freaking out because it's so cold, it's actually the one place I found peace and quiet in my
Mm,
brain for like a
mm,
moment, which is interesting. Well, yeah, because you're just like, I'm so damn cold. But also in that adrenaline, it does drop into something else where I can actually think of nothing. Because I tried to meditate, and it's just found it so hard. So I found that the water forced upon me that meditation. I don't know if that's healthy, but it definitely works.
mm,
I've heard good things about it for health, but I hear you with that too, and with the busy brain and the meditation. I also struggle with that, but it is something that I notice, like,
mm,
every year I go to this cabin like right before Christmas for like a week out near Flagstaff, and there's not really phone connection or internet service out there. And so I don't, I read books and I lay puzzles and I go for walks, and it's very much more chill than my regular life. And I notice that I'm able to meditate. I don't want to say like there's not like good and bad meditation. You're not supposed to talk about it that
Right.
way, but like I'm able to drop into that presence, to be really present. Um, After a week there in a way that I'm never able to when I'm part of my regular life. And so, but there are ways of kind of hacking that, which it sounds like cold water plunges are a great way to do that. There's also yoga is a great,
Yep.
yoga is about yoking the mind and the body, right? Like after doing a really intense yoga session, I often feel like I can also sit and focus a little bit better and have a little bit more presence. But
Right.
yeah, I think any ways that we can find to be able to
Yeah.
disconnect and do that, I think are
It's
probably going
interesting.
to
I
be
was listening.
beneficial.
I was listening to a Huberman podcast the other day, and they were talking about cold plunges and the dopamine and whatever that's released in your brain. And I was really interested because that's what we've been doing for like 3 years now, these cold plunges. And it has definitely had some kind of effect on me and obviously Devin too. And all these people around us are all starting to do it. It's just kind of become this thing. But he was saying that for your working memory, like your working memory, some of the things that could really help enhance your working memory were two things that they found in their science that they've been doing. Is one was cold water plunging. The other one was nidra yoga. And nidra yoga is where it takes you deep and you're basically bouncing off the sea, like it's like you're bouncing off the seafloor. You're not quite asleep, you're not quite awake, and you're not doing anything. And our friend is a coach or a guide of nidra yoga, and we've been going for quite a while. And so I thought that was really fascinating too. So these two things that he was saying for your brain. So these type of practices, like the from meditation to nidra yoga to the
Yeah.
things I mean, just from the short 3 years since COVID, just experiencing it, had 3 years of doing it. It's just made a profound change, and it's just much mellower and yeah, and more present. As you're saying, present makes me a lot more present. Definitely.
Yeah, and humans have been cultivating these practices for as long as
Yeah,
we've been around,
thousands and
right? Like
thousands. Yes.
technologies of the soul,
Yeah.
also, like kind of transpersonal
Yeah.
technologies, with the understanding that that states don't always come naturally, because our brains are have evolved to focus on survival, right? That's what keep
Exactly.
us alive.
Fight or
That's what
flight.
they're
Yeah.
doing.
Hmm.
And so, man, I could get on a whole tangent about like the default mode network and how it's like constantly scanning. Anytime we're not attending to anything, this default mode network part of our brain is like constantly scanning our environment for threats. And it's kind of like, hey,
Hmm.
you're not busy right now. Like, let's just run through every possible disaster scenario just that could ever happen. Let's just go ahead and replay like all of the conversations that you've had over the last couple of weeks to see if maybe we should have done anything different. It's where we get this like
Right. Yeah.
rumination.
Mm.
And it makes sense for survival to
Sure.
constantly be thinking about, what we could do, but it also leads to a lot of depression and anxiety. And so we're always looking for things to focus on. So one of the kind of theories is that this is why we use distraction so much, why we're constantly looking at our phone and doing these other things. But there's other things that interrupt that process. Cold plunges would definitely do that because you are
Mm.
present, right? You are
Yeah,
not
you have to be. Yeah.
um but meditation and mindfulness
Yeah.
seem to train yoga, all of these spiritual practices,
Yeah.
trance states, kind of quiet that survival part of the brain. And that also seems to have the benefit of decreasing the small self and allowing us to connect to what's beyond us, because the survival self doesn't have such a grip, on the
Right.
activity that's going on. And another huge thing that seems to quiet the activity in the default mode network is psychedelics.
Right.
So again, they're sort of all coming together, all these practices, but again, humans have been developing these for thousands of years, so there's so much that we can play with, and find something that works for us. I
Hmm.
I probably would benefit immensely from cold plunges, and I'm also terrified, and maybe someday I will do it. But in the meantime, I'm grateful that there are other techniques
It's
that I
funny.
can explore.
Yeah. There's only one secret to cold plunge. Hey, Devin, is like you're talking about fight or flight, right? So our body wants to like freak out and flight. So as soon as you get into cold water, your natural tendency is to tense up and, oh my God, I got to get out of here. But if you flip it on its head and go, I'm okay, and exhale as soon as you do it, and just like, I'm okay, within 3 seconds, you'll be like, hang on a second, I'm fine. And
Mm.
it's the weirdest thing you'll ever experience because you are fine. And your brain
Yeah.
knows. And then the more you do it, your brain knows, I'm cool. I'm I don't have to do this for an hour. And it's a really interesting. So I just exhale into it and I sit there and I'm good. But as soon as I tense up, I'm like, wow, and I want to jump out, right?
Mm.
And yeah. And I've seen that with friends of mine. A friend of mine, he started doing it with me and he could only get up as far as his calves. And he was like, this is effing crazy. And he'd jump out, right? And I'd be just there and I'd just be trying to breathe. And then next time he was up to his waist. Next time he's up at Whistler and he's broken ice in the lake off this dock and he says, come down and join me. And I'm like, okay. And we go, and he was totally fine because he was reversing
Mm.
everything, right? Yeah. Yeah. Very, very interesting. But
When we're thinking about how these practices interact with kind of the survival self or the survival functions
yeah,
of the brain,
yeah.
that there's like this communication where you're actually creating an experience
Mhm.
where your body and your brain are freaking out, and you are able to give it reassurance, because we got all these different, I always talk about this, like there's different
Yeah.
selves in there, right? There's the
Sure.
self
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're fine, it's going to be okay, and then you are. And I
Yeah.
wonder if that like builds up trust, so
Mm.
that when
I
your
think
brain
it
is freaking
does.
about other things, and you
Yeah.
and you are like, actually you're fine, actually, you
Mm.
know um like I have a little bit of a phobia of telephone calls.
Right.
Zoom is fine, I can do this all
Yeah.
day, but making a call, I don't know, I get, I get really
Sure.
anxious, mouth dry,
Yeah.
the whole
Mm.
thing.
Yeah.
But so for things like that, to be able to tell yourself like, this is fine, well, you put yourself in freezing cold water and you were fine, so maybe
Yeah.
you're going to be fine on this phone call too, like
Yeah.
build up the trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
And I,
interesting.
and I, and I think that goes back to what you were saying there about suffering. So, in the whole Buddhist thing, we're put here to suffer our lives. We're like, oh my God, that's crazy. But in our modern day, as we want to protect ourselves from suffering, but then suffering isn't so bad. I found that I go to this entrepreneurial conclave at MIT at Boston. I go every year, and we bring in speakers and whatnot. And I'll never forget, this one speaker came in and she was talking about suffering, basically for business people. Like, you failed in this, you failed in that, you lost your business, you whatever. But every single time you have these little fails or big fails, your brain actually does rewire itself. So the next time you come across something like that, it's not quite as difficult. You're like, hang on a second, I dealt with this before. I do, and you actually do. Whatever doesn't kill you make you stronger. But there's a lot of truth in that. That's what she was saying, and I'm wondering if that's like the cold water thing. Is you're going in and then you're in there and you're like, your brain's going, okay, I've done this before. I'm not going to die. I'm okay, and because it's rewired to know that, and you just kind of move through. So this whole suffering, I think, is part of everything that we are. And we learn from our suffering and we learn to adapt. We adapt, our brain adapts, and we do get
Yeah.
stronger. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, that book I mentioned, I think it's called The Disillusionment of Suffering, the Frank Gruber McAllister book, which is really
Mm.
beautiful. And the whole thing is kind of it's
Mm.
like, not only is suffering inevitable and we have to accept it,
Right.
but part of that is that we actually create a lot of harm when we don't accept it, because we try to keep
Uh,
ourselves safe from suffering. And so sometimes we justify putting suffering on others, or not
Mm.
being so great in the world, because we think we could keep ourselves safe. um,
hmm.
but also, we're not, if we're constantly learning that, we learn those dissociative techniques to pull suffering away, we stay in situations that are really unhealthy for us. But even
Hmm. Hmm.
larger than that, we don't engage in transformative practices for the reduction of the suffering of others, because we don't look at it,
Mm.
because it's going to make us
Uh-huh.
suffer, right? And this is just the really interesting thing with compassion, right? Is that we're so afraid of suffering,
Yes.
and somehow being present to the suffering of others and engaged in helping reduce that suffering and bringing them joy makes us feel better. um
Uh-huh.
or even sitting with them, because it's not always about, sometimes you can't fix it, right, for yourself or someone else. Sometimes, like, someone has a maybe like a chronic pain problem, or is going through the dying process, and there's nothing that you can
Sure.
do, but you can
Mm.
be with them, you can be present with them, you cannot let them suffer alone. You can
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
share
Mm-hmm.
that, and it
Mm-hmm.
helps, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Again, goes back to the beginning of like, we can't, if we only engage in doing things if we think we can win or like fix the problem,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
right? That's still ego based. So like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna sit with this dying friend because I can't save them, and
Mm,
what can I do? They're gonna die anyway.
mm.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, if we can learn to hold suffering and maybe have a different relationship with it too, I think yeah, powerful stuff.
It is very powerful. Yeah, wow, a lot of powerful things here. We've been this is amazing. Like just like I said, this is going to be an amazing chat. It's incredible. And I guess we're probably running out of a bit of time here. Um so Dev, is anything else that either of you guys have to say there? Because it's just been a fabulous, fabulous chat. Yeah, thank you so much. Any little nuggets, any little last
I loved
bits?
it. I learned so much. You're such a wonderful, brilliant person, and it was
Yeah.
amazing having
Wow.
you on the
If
show.
you ever come up to Vancouver, give us a ring for sure. Yeah. We'll go walk in nature.
Yes, excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me. I think the work that you're doing is amazing. I think it's so inspiring to hear from other people who are doing positive things in the world, and it makes us think, oh, how can I get involved? How can I do cool things too? So thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for the invitation to come and join you and share some of my thoughts on this stuff.
Right on.
No, thanks for the work you're doing. The work you're doing is so important, and it's just so nice to have a fresh, um, just yeah, you're just so fresh and just it's great. It's just I just love it. Just love it. Just love everything you talked about. So thank you so
Thank you.
much. Yeah, yeah. All right,
Awesome.
everybody. Yeah, Devin, you got a little couple lines to finish up with there, or you're
Yeah, guys, if you'd like to know more, we'll put everything in the link in the description of the video. Other than that, we are just having a great day, and I'm
yeah,
so, so stoked to have you on. We'll have to have you back on some point and
absolutely.
hear some
Yeah,
It'll be a
more
joy. Thank you.
super
yeah,
insightful, amazing perspectives on things, and love it. Absolutely love
yeah.
it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.